The air in the courtroom was so thick you could taste the varnish on the old wood panels. My ex's lawyer, Arthur Vance, a man whose smile never quite reached his predatory eyes, was performing for the judge with a practiced condescension. "Your Honor," he began, gesturing dismissively, "the plaintiff's entire case hinges on the bitter testimony of his vindictive ex-fiancée. With all due respect, her testimony holds no value whatsoever." I watched from the shadows at the back of the room as my ex-fiancé Mark, a charismatic salesman who treated truth as a negotiable commodity, nodded in solemn agreement. He looked every bit the victim. The judge, a man with tired eyes that had clearly seen this kind of theater before, simply looked down at the thick bound document on his bench. He let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. "Mr. Vance," his voice was flat, devoid of emotion, "are you referring to the lead investigator of Operation Nightingale, Special Agent Anya Sharma?" It wasn't a question. It was a correction. On that cue, the heavy courtroom doors swung open. I walked in, and the crisp sound of my polished dress shoes on the marble floor seemed to echo in the sudden, dead quiet. My U.S. Army CID dress uniform was immaculate, the medals on my chest a silent testament to a world he never knew. I fixed my gaze on Mark, and I saw his face, the confident smirk dissolving into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock as the color drained from it. He mouthed my name, a silent, strangled question. "Officer?" "That's her." But just 6 months ago, I was living in a very different world. We were at a dinner party at his parents' house, a weekly ritual of worship at the altar of Mark's ambition. He was holding court, regaling a potential business investor with a story of a recent deal, his every word a monument to his own genius. Then, the investor turned his polite gaze to me. "And Anya? What is it that you do?" Before I could even form a sentence, Mark let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Anya pushes paper for the government," he said, his tone dripping with the patronizing affection that felt like acid. "It's a sweet little admin job, you know. Keeps her busy." His father, Mr. Henderson, a retired business owner who saw his son's reflection as his greatest achievement, chimed in with a hearty chuckle. "Someone has to keep the bureaucrats organized." The whole table laughed along with them. I felt that familiar cold sting of their casual disregard, the weight of 1,000 similar moments settling in my stomach. The jokes about my hobby, the condescending pats on the head when I mentioned a difficult project. It was the price of admission to his world. But this time was different. This wasn't just another family dinner. This was a business meeting, and he had just erased me painting, me as an unserious, simple-minded accessory in a room where I was supposed to be his equal partner. He smiled, patting my hand as if I were a child. He thought he was just managing his image. He had no idea he was committing fraud right in front of a federal agent trained to spot it from a mile away. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the two lives he never knew I was living. To live in Mark's world was to live in his shadow, a cool, comfortable space as long as you never tried to seek the sun for yourself. His family's home was a shrine to his achievements. Framed newspaper clippings of his college lacrosse victories hung on the walls, and every dinner, conversation orbited around his latest conquest in the cutthroat world of corporate sales. I remember one evening in particular, a celebratory dinner for a deal he'd closed. He'd used a tactic that felt dishonest, pressuring a smaller company into a corner they couldn't escape. His family didn't see it that way. They raised their glasses of expensive champagne and toasted to his killer instinct. Later that night, as we were cleaning up, I tried to connect with him, to bridge the ever-widening gap between our worlds. I spoke vaguely about a case I was working on, the moral tightrope of it all, the gray areas where people's lives were at stake. He wasn't listening. He was staring at his reflection in the dark kitchen window, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "Babe," he said, turning to me with a look of profound pity. In the real world, there are winners and losers. That's it. Don't get lost in the paperwork. His mother, Eleanor, a woman whose entire identity was wrapped up in her son's success, overheard us. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on my arm, her touch as light as a spider's web. "Mark's world is so high pressure," she said, her voice a soft conspiratorial whisper. "It's wonderful that you have such a stable, simple job to support him." A simple job. The words echoed in my mind, a familiar refrain in the symphony of their condescension. It was the same tone they used when I'd tried to explain my graduate thesis. The same one they'd used when I'd been accepted into the academy. It was a pat on the head, a verbal dismissal of anything that didn't fit into their narrow definition of success. I just smiled and nodded, the invisible child in a room full of people who saw me as nothing more than a supporting character in their leading man's story. They had no idea that my simple job was a world away from their petty dramas and inflated egos. A world where the stakes were real and the consequences were permanent. My world was a place of silence and secrets, a place where the truth was a commodity more valuable than gold. It was a soundproof, windowless room deep in the heart of a secure government building, a sensitive compartmented information facility, or SCIF. The only light came from the glow of my computer screens, each one displaying a complex web of financial data that stretched across continents. There were no champagne toasts here, no backslapping congratulations. There was only the quiet, relentless pursuit of the truth. I stood before a stern-faced colonel, a man whose entire career had been built on a foundation of discipline and integrity. He listened intently as I laid out the case, my voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos I was describing. The suspect was layering transactions through a series of shell corporations based in 3 different countries, I explained, pointing to a flowchart on the screen. We initiated a suspicious activity report, a SAR flag, with FinCEN, which gave us the predicate for a full forensic audit under Statute 18, Section 1343. The colonel's eyes narrowed, his focus absolute. He asked a few pointed questions, testing the strength of my analysis, and I answered each one without hesitation. There was no room for error in this world, no space for the kind of sloppy, self-serving narratives that defined Mark's life. Here, the only thing that mattered was the evidence, the cold, hard facts that I had painstakingly pieced together from the digital shadows. After the briefing, as I was packing up my files, a figure emerged from the back of the room. It was Special Agent Davies, a seasoned investigator, and my partner, a grizzled, no-nonsense man who had seen it all and was impressed by nothing. He'd been with the agency for 30 years, and a word of praise from him was worth more than 1,000 empty toasts. He walked over to my desk, his expression unreadable. I braced myself for a critique, a question, a challenge. Instead, he just nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of respect. "Good work, Sharma," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Your attention to detail is going to put this guy away for a decade." And that was it. No fanfare, no applause, just a simple acknowledgement of my competence, a quiet recognition of the work I did in the shadows. It was a moment of profound validation, a stark reminder of the chasm between the 2 worlds I inhabited. In one, I was an accessory, a footnote in someone else's story. In the other, I was a force to be reckoned with, a woman whose work had the power to change lives, to bring down empires, to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. I had spent so much time trying to make myself smaller, trying to fit into their world, but in that moment, I realized that I had a world of my own, a world where I was seen, where I was respected, where I was powerful. For 2 years, I had tried to speak their language of profit margins and closing deals, but they only respected loud victories and public dominance. So I decided when the time came I would finally speak to them in the only language they truly understood. Consequences. The breakup was predictable. A series of hollow apologies, followed by the same old selfish behavior. But the final unforgivable act came a month later, in the form of a legal document. Mark offered to buy me out of our shared real estate investment for pennies on the dollar, complete with a set of falsified financial statements designed to devalue the property. He had underlined the lowball offer in red ink, a final, arrogant flourish. He truly believed his little paper pusher wouldn't have the skills to notice such a blatant forgery. That was his first mistake. A cold, quiet clarity washed over me. All the years of being minimized, of swallowing my pride, of accepting their condescending praise, it all burned away, leaving behind something hard and unyielding. This was no longer about a broken heart. It was about a crime. I decided then and there that I wouldn't fight him in a messy, emotional, legal battle. That was his world, his game. I would fight him in mine. My goal wasn't revenge. It was a correction of the record, executed with surgical precision. I spent the next 3 nights in a deep dive, my professional skills finally turned toward my personal life. The fraudulent documents he'd sent were laughably amateurish to a trained eye. I recognized the signature style of the notary he used, a man whose seal was known to be flexible. I cross-referenced public records, and a clear pattern emerged. This wasn't a one-time act of desperation against an ex-fiancé. This was his business model. He was running a sophisticated scheme of deception and fraud, and I now had the blueprint. There was, of course, the issue of conflict of interest. I couldn't be the one to investigate him. That would taint the entire case and give his lawyers an easy out. The system had to do the work. So, I drafted a formal, anonymous whistleblower complaint, a document of pure, unassailable fact. I detailed the methodology of his fraud in precise, technical language, citing the specific financial statutes he had violated. I laid out the digital breadcrumbs, the layered transactions, the shell corporations, all of it. I submitted the package to the Inspector General's office, and then I waited. Weeks later, a new case was officially opened. They called it Operation Nightingale, and just as I had anticipated, the lead investigator on the new case, struggling to unravel the complex digital fingerprints I had so carefully laid out, formally requested my consultation as a subject matter expert. It was an ironclad, unimpeachable, and professionally sound reason for my involvement. The trap was set. Mark had filed a civil suit, expecting to bury me in legal fees and motions. He had no idea he was just a file on my desk anymore. The invitations to the courtroom were sent, not from a law firm but from the Department of Justice. He was walking into my world, under my rules. The federal courtroom was a cold, impersonal space, designed to intimidate and impress. It smelled of old paper and sterile justice. I sat in the back, a ghost in civilian clothes, watching as Mark and his lawyer, Arthur Vance, took their places at the defendant's table. Mark looked relaxed, almost bored, as if this were just another inconvenient business meeting. He caught my eye for a moment and gave me a small, pitying smile, the same one he'd given me 100 times before. It was the smile of a man who believed he was untouchable, who saw me as a minor obstacle to be brushed aside. In the gallery, his parents sat in the front row, their faces a mask of concerned loyalty, ready to testify to the impeccable character of their golden boy. They were all so confident, so sure of their narrative. They had no idea they were actors in a play, and I had written the final act. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, stood and addressed the court. Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that filled the room. The government calls Special Agent Anya Sharma to the stand. A ripple of confusion went through the gallery. Vance whispered something to Mark, who just shrugged, his smirk unwavering. He thought it was a clerical error, a meaningless title. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The heavy courtroom doors at the back swung open, and I stepped through. I had changed out of my civilian clothes and into my full U.S. Army CID dress uniform. The crisp lines of the jacket, the polished gleam of the medals on my chest, the weight of the fabric on my shoulders. It was an armor I had earned, a symbol of a life he had refused to see. The walk to the witness stand felt like a mile. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic click of my heels on the marble floor. Every eye in the room was on me, but I only looked at the judge. I could feel Mark's gaze burning into the side of my face, a look of stunned, dawning horror. This was not the woman he had dismissed, the woman he had cheated, the woman he had called a paper pusher. This was someone else entirely. I took my seat in the witness box, my back straight, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I was no longer a participant in his drama. I was an officer of the court, a federal agent prepared to testify to the facts. The room was silent, the air thick with a tension you could cut with a knife. Vance shot to his feet, his face a mask of theatrical outrage. "Objection, Your Honor," he boomed, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "This is a pathetic intimidation tactic. My client's ex-fiancé is wearing a costume to prejudice the court. Her testimony is biased, emotional, and it holds no value." He was playing to the gallery, trying to paint me as a scorned woman seeking revenge. It was the only card he had left to play. The AUSA didn't even flinch. She waited for his outburst to subside, a look of almost bored patience on her face. Then she turned to the judge. "Your Honor?" she said, her voice a calm, steady counterpoint to Vance's histrionics. "Special Agent Sharma is not here today in her capacity as the defendant's ex-fiancé." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "She is here as the lead forensic investigator who authored the report that serves as the basis for these federal charges." She gestured to the thick, 300-page binder sitting on the judge's desk, a silent, damning testament to Mark's crimes. She turned her gaze back to Vance, a cold, sharp edge to her voice. "Her testimony. Ayisa, the evidence." A dead silence fell over the courtroom. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Vance stood there, his mouth slightly agape, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling to dust around him. He looked from the AUSA, to me, to the judge, his eyes wide with a desperate, panicked confusion. He collapsed back into his chair, his entire strategy obliterated in a single, devastating sentence. I saw Mark's father lean forward, squinting, as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing, what he was hearing. This was not a lover's quarrel. This was a federal case, and his son was at the center of it. The judge looked at me, then at the sputtering lawyer. A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, or maybe even a grim satisfaction, crossed his face. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice dangerously low, "I suggest you sit down before I hold you in contempt." He then turned his gaze to me, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Objection overruled," he said, his voice ringing with a final, unassailable authority. "Proceed, Special Agent." For years, my name in his mouth was a term of dismissal. In the end, it only took the two words in front of it, Special Agent, for him to finally understand what it meant. The judge's gavel came down with a crack that seemed to seal Mark's fate. Bail was denied. The hearing was over in less than an hour, a total and utter rout. Two stoic court-martials moved in, their movements practiced and efficient. They cuffed Mark's hands behind his back, the metallic click echoing in the stunned silence of the courtroom. As they led him away, he looked small. The swagger, the charisma, the unshakable confidence. It had all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow-eyed stranger. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. To acknowledge me now would be to acknowledge the truth of what he'd done, of who I really was. And that was a truth he was not yet ready to face. I stepped down from the witness stand, my legs steady, my heart calm. My partner, Davies, was waiting for me at the end of the aisle. He didn't offer a handshake or a pat on the back. He just gave me a single firm nod, his eyes filled with a quiet, profound respect. "Good work, Sharma," he said, his voice a low rumble. And in that moment, those 3 simple words meant more to me than a lifetime of hollow compliments from Mark's family. As I walked towards the exit, I passed his parents. They were huddled together on the hard wooden bench, looking lost and insignificant in the cavernous room. His mother's face was streaked with tears. His father's a mask of gray, stunned disbelief. They were no longer the titans of their small, self-important world. They were just 2 old people who had bet on the wrong horse. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. 1 year later, the world was a different place. I stood at attention on a decorated stage, the bright lights of the ceremony warming my face. I was surrounded by my colleagues, my true peers, the men and women who understood. The sacrifices, the long hours, the quiet, thankless work we did in the shadows. My commanding officer, the same stern-faced colonel I had briefed all those months ago, stood at the podium, his voice ringing with a sincerity that was as rare as it was powerful. He spoke of unimpeachable integrity and forensic skill of the highest order. He pinned the Army Commendation Medal to my chest, the weight of it a solid, tangible reminder of a legacy I had built for myself. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, Davies, my fellow agents, my new team, and I saw not just respect, but a deep, abiding sense of camaraderie. This was my family now, a family forged not by blood, but by a shared commitment to the truth. The consequences of Mark's actions had rippled out, swift and devastating. A news clipping a few months after the hearing had told the whole story. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for 2 counts of wire fraud and ordered to pay over $1 million in restitution. His father's company, built on a foundation of bluster and deceit, had declared bankruptcy, its reputation in tatters. The empire they had built, the legacy they had been so proud of, had crumbled to dust, a victim of its own arrogance. It was not a victory I celebrated, but a quiet, somber correction of the record. A balancing of the scales. My new office was larger than my old one, with a window that overlooked the sprawling city. The nameplate on the door was simple, elegant, and powerful. Saik Anya Sharma, Special Agent in Charge. I was briefing a new team of junior agents, their faces a mixture of eagerness and nervous respect. I was in command now, my voice calm and authoritative, my words carefully chosen. In the middle of my briefing, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I glanced down and saw a long, rambling paragraph, a desperate, tear-stained apology from Mark's mother. "I am so sorry, Anya," it began. "We never knew. We never understood." I read the first few words, my face impassive. I felt nothing, no anger, no pity, not even the faint, ghostly echo of a wound. It was a message from another lifetime, a plea from a world I no longer inhabited. I archived the message without replying and turned back to my team, my focus entirely on the future, on the work that still needed to be done. He thought my value was something he could define and then dismiss. He learned the hard way that my worth was never up for his negotiation. If you've ever had to prove your own value against someone else's narrative, share your story below. In this community, your testimony is always valid.